allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Just a couple announcements. Please silence all cell phones. Also, notice that all members of the public in attendance, they may be recorded via audio or video by other members of the public. Sunoco Mariner update. With us tonight, we have Mr. Richard Sikora.
Yes, Sikora, correct. It's a tough one. Good evening, everybody. My name is Rich Sikora. I'm David Bloomer's partner. I'm here to provide an update over the last month related to the Sunoco case. There was 2 discovery motions. There was approximately 4,000 documents provided by Sunoco. We didn't think they were sufficient. And they also raised some objections in lieu of responding to some of our requests. We filed a motion to compel them to provide us additional documents. They were not satisfied with our answers and filed a motion to compel documents from the township. The township was successful on both motions. Judge Barnes denied Sunoco's motion to overrule our objection, so the township did not have to provide anything further. And Judge Barnes granted our motion, the township's motion, and entered an order compelling Sunoco to produce a significant amount of additional documents than what we've received to date. The date for that production is no later than November 21st. So we haven't received anything additional yet, but we are anxiously anticipating those. In addition, there were several other motions that were filed. There was a motion to modify the procedural schedule in this case. So right now we're in what they call discovery, where we exchange information between the parties to allow us to know what we are fighting over when we actually go to a hearing. A hearing is scheduled to begin February 1st. It's a little different in the PUC how they do the hearings. It's a lot of written submissions, not just like a normal trial. But in any event, the proceedings are to start February 1st. Sunoco wants to shorten that time period significantly to the tune of resolving it in November. We do not think that is likely, particularly given that we don't even have all the documents from Sunoco yet. But that petition is outstanding. In addition, there was a petition to modify the interim emergency order, which is otherwise known as the injunction that stopped construction. Sunoco sought to change the order to allow them to perform more construction within the township, as long as they were not physically constructing the actual valve itself. We were opposing that motion on the basis that the other construction was directly related to the valve, but before we even finalized our answer on that motion, the Public Utility Commission, the actual body above the administrative law judge, ruled essentially affirming the administrative law judge's prior order from July, meaning the Public Utility Commission said, we agree with the judge that the interim emergency order or the injunction was properly granted. That had been pending. It was a little bit overdue from the normal rules. Based on the language of that pretty lengthy rule, I think it's approximately 50 pages, Sunoco withdrew its motion to modify the interim emergency order. So we never actually had to finalize an answer for that, and that's resolved. And so right now, that's the only things pending are the motion which has been answered to shorten the procedural schedule, which we're hopeful will not be granted, and we're waiting on the documents pursuant to our motion, which was successful. And that's all I have. Subject to any questions, sir.
Any questions from the board? Anybody from the audience have any questions? because this will be the end of Sunoco for the evening. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.
Next will be reports for the month of October 2017. Chief Joseph, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For the month of October, the West Goshen Police responded to 2,013 calls for service. We responded to 51 alarms, only one of which was valid. We investigated 32 reportable motor vehicle accidents, and we logged 22,004 miles on our patrol vehicles. In addition to other locations, selective enforcement was active on Warren Road, Falcon Lane, Sylvan Road, Spruce Avenue, Green Hill Road, Taylor's Mill Road, Airport Road, and Ellis Lane. And our career development program continues. We have continuing training with our emergency response team and our honor guard, and we had additional range training this year due to the transition of new weapons. And Officers Cotter and Meredith attended the Juveniles Conference. Captain Stone attended the National Academy Section 4 Conference. We had 3 officers attended a week-long crisis intervention training, and now that gives West Goshen Police 6 officers that are nationally recognized, nationally trained, should I say, or certified in crisis intervention training. Officer Boyle attended combat shooting, and we had 2 officers, our taser instructors, had to go through a recertification because of the new models of tasers that we are transitioning to. And myself, the command staff, and Sergeant Bliss attended an active shooter presentation put on by the FBI, and Officer Virgilio attended a collision reconstruction seminar related to his responsibilities with the traffic safety unit. One thing, if I may, I just lost my train of thought. My apologies. I'll get back to you. My apologies.
Thank you. Andrea Testa.
Thank you. For the month of October, there were a total of 45 inspections. 16 commercial use and occupancy, 4 fire blocking, 12 sprinkler, 3 framing, 3 fire alarm, 2 fire extinguisher placement, 1 residential final, 1 walkthrough, and 3 kitchen hoods. There were 4 fire calls, 3 automatic fire alarms, and 1 building fire. I attended 2 meetings, had 1 complaint follow-up, locked up 3 Knox boxes, and attended 12 hours of training. And Good Fellowship Ambulance had 96 calls per month. Thank you.
Yes.
Old age, my apologies. I just wanted to let you know that the beginning of this year, we had tried to schedule a Citizens Police Academy, and we had a postponement. And I wanted to say that we successfully completed our first. It was an 8-week course attended by 13 residents, and they were certified in CPR and first aid, and they attended the training center out in Coatesville and went through the Shoot Don't Shoot simulator, and they toured the 911 center, and based on all the responses that we got in the evaluations, it was very successful, and I actually had a couple of them ask me to invite them back for the next time we do it. So thank you for the support, and we'll be putting them again. So thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Building official, John Beswick.
Good evening. For the month of October, there was a total of 87 permits, 15 building, 16 electrical, 4 fire protection, 13 HVAC, 9 plumbing, 7 roofing, 5 zoning, and 9 use and occupancies, 6 EMS, 1 sewer tapping, 1 open space, and 1 road occupancy. The estimated cost of construction was $2,875,264.64. The permit fees were $35,138.58. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, Board of Supervisors announcements.
I just wanted to recognize all of the veterans in the audience. I'm sitting here as a veteran myself, Bill Corbo, Army veteran, Vietnam, Hugh Purnell, Army, Mr. Ted Murphy, served in the same division I did, the 82nd Airborne, and I'm sure there are others. I'm just wanting to point out that this is Veterans Day coming up on Friday, and please take time to thank and get involved in some of the many veteran organizations that are out there. That's it.
Chris said, the Veterans Day Parade for the area is going to be on Sunday. Steps off at 2 o'clock from Henderson High School in Walktown, and the ceremonies will be held in front of the old courthouse, the big old courthouse. Thank you.
Nothing tops that. I mean, if I see something on trash, I'm in trouble. So no, thanks.
Okay, Township Manager?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I have 3 announcements. First, our e-waste collection is this Saturday, November 11th from 9 to noon, right in front of Public Works across the way. Everything with a cord, $30 for television sets is what they're charging now. Everything else is free. Second, our fall leaf collection is the same day, Saturday, November 11th. Curbside, no plastic bags, please. I would have your stuff at curbside the night before on Friday. And finally, we have a shred event Saturday, 9 to noon, same location across the way, November 18th. Any limit, Lisa, to what you bring? No limit, so bring everything you have. Get rid of your documents. Everybody's safe. That's it. Thank you very much.
Everything's free except for the TVs.
Correct. Correct for the e-waste. Then for the shred, everything's free for the shred. Yep.
Thank you. Township Engineer, Rick Ray.
Nothing to report tonight, thank you.
Okay. So, Tony.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. 2 weeks ago, I attended the conference for the American Association of Code Enforcement and completed 24 continuing education credits towards my recertification on building inspection licenses. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I move for approval of the Board of Supervisors minutes of October 11th and October 18th.
Any questions from the audience? I'll second that. All in favor? Ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move for approval on the Treasury report dated October 31st this year for the General Fund, the Sewer Revenue Fund, the Waste and Recycling Fund, the Capital Reserve Fund, and the bills to be paid from those funds.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Hearing none, second that. All in favor? Ayes have it.
That's fine. Do you want me to go number 12? As lightly as I can, the tragic death of township president and community great guy, Brooks Jennings, has been in a constant turmoil for those of us that are close to it, and of course, the neighbors and family. The residents of Box Elder, where Brooks lived, those of you who are familiar with it, off Bells Lane, there's a pond there. The township works very, very hard on that pond. Actually brought it back to life years ago. Worked on it for a long, long time, and it's a beautiful little spot. Anyway, the residents contacted me shortly after Brooks' death that I believe were one of the fundraisers, and long story short, wanted to have some type of memorial for Brooks that would last indefinitely for him, and especially for Matthew and his wife Jill. But when we talked, and we agreed that they would go through the entire Box Elder development. I told them they didn't have to. They did as far as they went, but there's 3 solid pages. I think it's over 90 signatures to asking the Board of Supervisors to dedicate the Box Elder Pond in Brooks Jennings' memory. Not to rename that the park there, but to dedicate the pond spot. It's a beautiful little spot that we're all personally proud of. And presented to us, it was submitted to all the board members, is 3 pages of signatures that, anybody wants to take a look at them. I think Kathy is here tonight, that she did the circulation and was and is close to the Jennings family. That basically sums it up, without getting it carried away. I just lay it before the Board of Supervisors to grant this request to dedicate the Box Elder Pond in the memory of Brooks Dance.
If you make that as a motion, I'll second
I have would the board like to also have staff work on having a plaque created, signage for it? Would you like to have that as part of the motion?
Add the signage.
Good, we'll get on that.
We did a riparian buffer around it in the front, and nice benches. You can walk all the way around. It's beautiful. Beautiful.
Any questions from the audience?
Kathy, did you want to say anything on?
Yeah, just thank you. I think it's a nice
This is
place
Kathy
that
Pratt.
Matt, hi, Kathy Pratt. I'm a committee woman for West Goshen as well as neighbor and friends of Brooks and Jill. And their son Matthew. It's just a nice place for him to go and remember his dad. So, thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. You got a second on that?
Yep.
it. I second.
Okay, all in favor? Ayes have it, good, thank you. Okay, at this point, we're going to have the public hearing for the Woodlands of Greystone Neighborhood Improvement District. Hi, Connie.
Okay, we're going to go on record with the court's report. It will be reflected in the minutes, and the transcript will be available and attached to the minutes. Thank you. Oh, yeah, keep it rolling, please. Okay. So, 7:15.
Okay, this is a public hearing, so before we start to hear from the applicant in the public hearing, a little ground rules if we will. Everyone will have an opportunity to ask questions during the course of the hearing. If you would raise your hand, I will recognize you. Please stand and state your name and address for the record, please. Ask your question, and then the question will be answered by whatever witness or testimony is presented by the applicant to answer your question. If there are statements with regard to the application, the statements that you want to make on the record, you'll have that opportunity as well. I would request that we do that at the end of the hearing. I would open up the floor to questions for the board to ask questions after the applicant prepares and finalizes their case, and then I will open it up to the audience. If anyone has any questions as to that procedure? With that, this is, Marcia?
Yes,
I'm
excuse
sorry.
me, sir. Would you just clarify, you're going to have to stand and state your name.
Good evening, my name is Margie Swart, 1519 Lakes Drive. Are questions allowed at the end as well, or just statements at the end?
No, questions will be allowed at any time, Margie. But sometimes there's somebody that is on, however they make their presentation, you may be a witness here, so you might want to ask questions after the board asks questions of that particular witness. And then if you have an additional question at the end, we'll recognize it.
Great, thank you, sir.
And this is a hearing on Woodlands at Greystone for the Neighborhood Improvement District. And the reason for this is to propose Woodlands as a Greystone Neighborhood Improvement District being considered by the township. Such comments related to the Neighborhood Improvement District that would be provided by the affected property owners within the proposed area. The proposed NID district, this would be a zoning district. Consists of approximately 444 acres along with additional public property in which public improvements will be built. The NID district is generally bounded by US Route 322 to the south, Foxtown Pike to the west, Green Hill Road,
to the north and Phoenixville Pike to the east. The NIT district is also includes land on which certain public improvements are to be constructed. We'll go through what those improvements are during the course of the testimony. The board has 4 exhibits. D1 is the Woodlands at Greystone Neighborhood Improvement District Plan that will be showing on the board here. B2 is approved publication in the Daily Local News, which was advertised on October 25th, providing access to the residents of West Goshen Township and the general public as to this hearing. B3 is email correspondence dated October 6, 2017, directly to the affected landowners from Tyler Gray, part of the presentation committee here. And B4 is a PowerPoint presentation that you'll be seeing on the board as well. Mr. Kyle Greco, you're here for the applicant?
I am, Mr. Braun.
Have any objections to those 4 exhibits for the board?
None.
They are admitted. Mr. Kyle Greco, as they say in the trade, you're on.
Thank you.
My name is Lou Colagreco, and I'm representing Research Land Development this evening with this proposal for the establishment of the NID district on property known as Greystone, otherwise known as the Draheem property, colloquially here in the township. The purpose of this hearing pursuant to statute is to give notice to affected property owners, and in this instance there's only one, about the proposed the proposed assessment district to be established on this property, hopefully by West Goshen Township. And then by statute, that property owner has 45 days to issue any objections it might have to the establishment of this property as a separate assessment district. We've been before the board a couple of times to present this conceptually. We've been before the staff numerous times to discuss the application. What we're going to present tonight is sort of a rehash of those prior presentations. We'll move through this as quickly as possible because I think we all believe that you get more out of questions than you do presentation. We don't always know what's on everybody's mind, so rather than take time and spend 2 hours going through something that no one may care at all about, we will go through a cursory presentation and then open ourselves up, as Mr. Bryan said, to whatever questions the board or the residents may have. I have 3 witnesses, so to speak, that I'll be presenting tonight, although we have a number of representatives of our development team here to answer questions as they may come up. Ken Lettinger, our counsel, who's together with Lindsay Banner of Unicap, essentially put together this plan. These folks have experience in doing these assessment plans, which I do not have, and frankly are somewhat new to this area of Pennsylvania for a residential project of this magnitude. We have Bill Reeser, the developer of the property, in the second row. I don't intend to call Bill as a witness tonight, but I do intend to call the gentleman right next to him, Dean Draheem, as my first witness. So we're going to have 3 witnesses. We're going to start with Dean. I think, Lindsay, I'm going to then hand it over to you as we get into the slideshow presentation. I'm sorry, Ken, and then Lindsay will finish up with you. We have Ray Grahowski, our project manager, who can answer any development question that might come up about the project. And I can try and answer whatever questions these folks can't answer, which I don't think there'll be many or any. So with that, I'd like to ask Dean that you rise and be sworn. I only have a couple of very short questions for you.
Before you swear him in, just for clarity, Lou, the property is about 444 acres, and for one of the better terminology, it is the Jerakian tract only, is that correct?
That's correct.
So there's no other land in the township that is included in this? It's strictly that 444 acres owned by the Jerakian family in some way or another?
That is correct. There are 13 tax parcels that we're asking the board to consider for inclusion in this district. 12 of those tax parcels are owned by Draheem, a Pennsylvania general partnership, and one of those tax parcels is owned by Draheem Brothers. But Dean is here because he's been authorized by the family to speak on its behalf, and I'm going to ask you a question, Dean, because statutorily, we are required to give you notice or to give the affected property owners notice 30 days prior to the hearing and to provide a copy of the plan. On behalf of all of those affected property owners, did you accept service of that plan back on October 6th?
Yes, I did.
Okay. So we also want to represent to the board that over the past month, various, I will call them clerical clarification amendments have been made to the plan, which you were presented back on October 6th. I forwarded you a copy of the revised plan yesterday, and I'm going to ask you the same question on behalf of your fellow family members. You did agree to accept service of that revised plan, correct?
Yes, I did.
And to the extent that the board doesn't have it, I'm going to ask if you could just hand down copies of the clean plan. Again, these changes that were made to the plan were made as the result of input from the Township Solicitor's Office, Mr. Bryan's office, as well as Township Bond Counsel, as well as other folks in the township staff who read the plan and suggested that we make certain minor, really definitional modifications to the plan to be consistent throughout. Nothing substantive has changed. So this is a unique way to get this project, which has been long awaited in West Goshen and the 165-acre park, underway next year. Also to get the connector road from Pottstown Pike to Phoenixville Pike constructed, hopefully next year, and to get 5, 6, 7, or 8 intersections that PennDOT has targeted for improvement, but no one has had the money to improve, to get them fixed next year, and to do a lot of public improvement, in fact $21 million worth of public improvement, which hopefully will commence in 2018 if things go according to plan. It's enough for me. With that said, Lindsay, I'm going to ask you to be sworn, or Ken. I'm going to do this all night. Ken, you can be sworn.
Yes.
That's okay. I can slide the chair.
Oh, you want me to sit down?
I'd like to stand for it. You swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, and the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do. I do.
I'll speak loud. I think I can project over the room. Ken, would you identify yourself and your occupation for purposes of the record?
My name is Ken Luddinger. I'm a lawyer at Buchanan, Ingersoll and Rooney, Pittsburgh, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
And can you identify the task that you were asked to perform in conjunction with the establishment of the Neighborhood Improvement District Plan?
I've been asked to help create the NID district and related documents, as well as assist in financing the ultimate project if the township determines to go forward with it.
Okay, let's start the slideshow. Rick, if you can move on to the next slide. Ken, I'm going to ask you to address each one of these slides. And
Okay.
the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Our presentation will consist of 3 principal parts. Why are we creating a neighborhood improvement district, which we just simply call the NID? Secondly, the schedule, the various steps involved in creating the NID, and then a short summary or overview of the plan itself. Again, the plan has been circulated to the property owners. And this is a public hearing, but I would like to point out that the statute does have very specific provisions regarding this, and that we'll go through the slides, but we welcome and encourage you to ask questions and provide some comments. But the plan will be considered by the Board of the Township Supervisors only if the property owners do not object to it. And it's the affected property owners, those within the NID district itself, that are statutorily authorized to object. Certainly the Board of Supervisors wants to take into consideration all the comments from the community, but it does really only impact directly those property owners within the neighborhood improvement district. Next slide, please. Why create the district? And this is simply a just depiction of the plan. We can move on to the next because we'll have others of this. We are proposing, and the reason for creating the NID is that it gives us the authority to impose assessments on the properties located within the NID. With these assessments, we can then go and use that as a source of payment and security for debt to be issued. In this case, we propose to issue bonds that will pay for the public improvements. And by creating the district and imposing the assessments, we will then be, as I said, be able to go issue debt, and instead of having to wait for the project to be sold and be successful to generate cash, we'll be able to finance the public improvement at the outset of the project, instead of waiting till the properties are sold. So it will expedite the construction,
It'll accelerate the installation of the needed infrastructure, and it will help encourage economic development in the community by improving the roads as well as some of the water and sewer infrastructure. Next slide, please. The proposed public improvements include Collector Road, road improvements to Route 322, Phoenixville Pike, this new Collector Road, improvements to Green Hill Road, Fern Hill Road, Pottstown Pike, Sunset Lane. There'll be sidewalk and curbing, landscaping, streetlights, water and sewer improvements, a new pump station, open space improvements. We'll be creating a new park, dam repairs and wetland mitigation. Without, as I said before, without the NID, the public improvements will be deferred until they actually subdivide the project parcels, develop them and sell them. And the ability to finance those is dependent upon selling the parcels to homeowners, which will generate the cash needed to fund the public improvements. And the idea here is that we will, upon funding this, the improvements will be dedicated to the township, and they will no longer be in private hands. One other point I want a correction to make. While all the NID itself includes only the parcels within the Joharian properties, there are some slivers of public land that will be included in the NID. They're not subject to tax, so there's no or assessment, but we can only finance improvements within the NID itself. So as a result, we have to include some corners of public roads so that we can work on those intersections and finance it through this process. Next slide, please. Here you go. As I said, under the NID statute, we're authorized to impose these assessments. And then we will issue bonds that will be payable from the assessments. The bonds are unlike the bonds that the township would typically issue. When the township issues debt to finance improvements, they are routinely secured by and payable from taxes. There are general obligations of the township, and payable from property taxes and other funds available to the township. So it impacts the millage rate. There are also limits under state law on the amount of debt that the township can issue. These bonds would not be payable at all from any taxes of the township. They would not be a liability of the township. They would be secured by and payable solely from these special assessments, which would be imposed solely on properties within the neighborhood district. No one else in the community would bear any responsibility for payment. If the special assessments are not paid, the township would have no obligation whatsoever to make any payments with respect to the bonds. They are somewhat speculative, although these are typically used in conjunction. These NID bonds are generally in a form of enhancement, additional security for what are typically called tax increment financing bonds, which are used routinely in Pennsylvania for economic development. Here we actually have the property owners will agree to pay these assessments up front. But the bonds themselves are not sold to the retail public, so people won't have these in their retirement accounts and will be subject to exposure in the event that the project's not successful or people don't pay the assessments. They're sold generally to institutional investors, large insurance companies, and mutual funds. And the proposal is not for the township to issue the bonds, but rather the Chester County Industrial Development Authority to further insulate the township from any exposure. In the event of a default on the payment of these assessments and not having sufficient funds to pay principal and interest on the bonds, bondholders would only have a claim to the assessment, and there would be liens on the property themselves. If people fail to pay the assessment, then we can attach a lien on the property, and they can ultimately foreclose on the real estate itself to help pay off the debt. Again, there would be no liability to the township, moral, legal, or otherwise. Next slide, please. Now we'll talk about the Well, let me just, on this chart, you can see there are a couple of legs there that extend out. And those are components basically to capture some of the public roads that we can include the improvements as being within the NID. And again, those particular parcels are publicly owned parcels, so they would not be subject to assessment. Next slide, please. As Lou mentioned, the statute requires that that there be a written report prepared. Yes, sir.
Could we back up, please?
Sure.
I see an indication that there's a small note that goes over to North Hill Drive. In that boundary that you're describing, that's it. Could you explain that?
Right.
Can you stand and be sworn, please? I'm sorry.
I'll get one.
Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Good evening, I'm Ray Grahowski, I'm the project manager. And to answer your question, that little nub that you're seeing into North Hills is not actually a road, it's just the property line has a very funny shape to it. I think there was a land swap done 50 years ago. So the property does have frontage on the road in North Hills. It's Penn Drive, I forget the name of the road in North Hills, but it does have frontage on there, but there's no road proposed there. There's no connector. It's just open space.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, would you go back? Yeah. So as part of the process required by the statute, we are required to prepare a report and send it to the property owners in the proposed NID district at least 30 days before the public hearing. As Lou mentioned, the copy of the plan was sent to the property owners on October 5th or 6th. The statute also requires that an advertisement of the public hearing on establishing the NID, which was solicited to the township solicitor and reviewed and commented upon, and then published on October 25th, I believe. This is the public hearing that's required by the statute. Once the public hearing is held, the township is not permitted to take any action until 45 days after the hearing to give affected property owners time to object in writing. If more than 40% of the property owners object, the plan cannot be adopted by the township. Assuming there are no objections to the plan, then the township will be able to act on the ordinance commencing in January, and we would propose to have the township consider it at their January regularly scheduled meeting. The NID ordinance that was included, and a copy of that is included in the plan itself, includes creation of a management association, which is generally called a NIDMA, to oversee and administer the operations of the NID district. And they're responsible for, in this case, actually imposing the assessments, collecting them, sending out the bills, and answering questions from property owners, and dealing with all the administrative details, because there are various items that would also arise as a result of having issued bonds. There are IRS reports that need to be filed, as well as information required to be submitted to the SEC in connection with the sale of bonds. In our case, we'll be creating a nonprofit corporation to serve as the management association. The statute requires that the management association either be a municipal authority or a nonprofit corporation. We've chosen to use a nonprofit corporation simply because it's less tedious to create it. The board of the NIDMA will include representatives of the township, of the issuer of the bonds, as well as the property owners. As this slide points out, the NIDMA will hire a third party to actually do the day-to-day activities. They'll calculate the annual installments, the assessment, because we would be proposing to issue bonds with a 30-year maturity, so that as a result, will impose an assessment for the full amount, the gross amount, but it will be payable in annual installments, which tie into the annual administrative expenses, annual principal and interest payable on the bonds. The statute authorizes and the plan will authorize property holders to prepay the assessments so that they don't have to do it on an annual basis. The administrator will do that as well, compute those amounts, and provide all the monitoring. And as it says, the township, the property owners, and the bond issuer will all be represented on the board of directors. It's proposed that there be 5 members of the board. So the township's involvement will simply be to designate one or more representatives to serve on the board, and will not be responsible for the collection or billing of these assessments. Next, please. And now we'll call up Lindsay Banner from Unicap to discuss the details of the plan.
You swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do. My name is Lindsay Banner. I'm with Unicap, who is a public financial consulting firm based out of Columbia, Maryland, with offices in Charleston, Richmond, and Dallas. And in our role, we have provided consultation in creating the neighborhood improvement district plan, the financials, and understanding the capital markets for which these bonds will eventually be issued. Our group has worked to administer over 200 of these projects and raise over $5 billion of this type of capital. So with that, as Ken alluded to, we prepared the neighborhood improvement district plan based on the statutory requirements. So the subsequent slides that I will go over will be the details associated with the requirements that include what are the tax parcels comprising the district, what are the boundaries of the neighborhood improvement district, along with what are the special assessments financing, so what are those public improvements, along with how will those special assessments be allocated and collected, as well as the role of the Neighborhood Improvement District Management Association, which is responsible for collecting annually, billing and collecting, for purposes of repaying the debt that is proposed to be issued. So with this first slide, we have the list of tax parcels, and I will say, as Lou had alluded to, the Neighborhood Improvement District Plan was circulated 30 days prior to tonight's hearing, and there were NITs that were provided over the duration of the past month. The only real update that has any form of substance in terms of what is reflected is the tax parcels shown. There was inadvertently 3 additional tax parcels in the original Neighborhood Improvement District Plan that was circulated, also owned by the current property owner, but we excluded them in the revised version as they were not to be included in the boundaries of the district, as special assessments would not be levied and proposed development would not be delivered on those 3 tax parcels.
The one thing we may want to check on here that the solicitor, Brian, just brought to my attention is that on the amended plan, which we handed out this evening, this slide is taken from the, I believe, maybe the original plan, but we have an acreage discrepancy. On the amended plan, we have a total acreage of 440.90, and on the slide on the plan, we have an acreage of 359.61. So what I'm going to ask you to do is go on with the rest of your presentation, and maybe we can clarify that discrepancy as the residents are asking questions. But suffice it to say, I think that just may be a mathematical calculation. Thank you for bringing it to my attention, Mr. Bryan, but we'll clear that up. Those are the correct tax parcels, however. So if you want to move on, we can take a look at that.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Lou. Okay, so the list here shows that the same property owner owns all of the properties in the proposed neighborhood improvement district. So within that, if you could, next slide, please. You have the boundaries, and you will note within this boundary map that there is a donut hole in the middle. There currently exists a mansion on 2 parcels that were on that prior list. And upon subdivision, for which property is proposed to be developed as the Woodlands at Greystone, the tax parcels that are subdivided and house the mansion will be excluded from the boundaries of the Neighborhood Improvement District, which is the boundaries shown here on this map. The thought is that the mansion has existed for over 100 years and therefore it does not necessarily benefit from the special assessments being levied. As a result, they will be excluded. Next slide, please. So the development that's proposed for the Woodlands at Greystone are 5 different property types composing about 598 units. So these are the tax parcels on which special assessments will be levied and collected only within the boundaries of this Neighborhood Improvement District. And therefore, the special assessments levied and collected would therefore be servicing the debt and repaying the public improvements that are servicing and benefiting these properties. Next slide, please. So the bonds that Ken alluded to will be in the amount, will finance roughly $23 million in public infrastructure that is proposed to be delivered within the first 2 to 3 years of the development. So these public improvements are being delivered up front. As shown here, there'll be the collector road, which is the main arterial route that will allow access for Pottstown Pike and Phoenixville Pike, as well as open space. I believe it's 162 acres of park space that will be the benefit of the township. That will include 6 miles of running trails along with, I believe, 4 small public parking areas along with 3 dams, one of which will be updated and improved as it's currently in disrepair. In addition, there will also be a sanitary sewer station, a pump station delivered that will allow for another existing service or sewer pump station to be retired. And then along with any wetland mitigation, any sanitary sewer lines and water lines. Next slide, please. So this is simply a map illustrating, it's kind of hard to see just due to the size, but in terms of what will be delivered. Each of those blue descriptions correlate with the prior slide in terms of the specific improvements being delivered. Next slide, please. So just a quick wrap up in terms of the public improvements benefiting as a result of the special assessments and what they're being paid. They cost about $23 million. They will all be delivered approximately at this time by September 2020, and they're necessary for the vertical construction to be completed, so those 598 lots to be improved. So, and the bonds are then being proposed to issue to finance those public improvements and secured by those special assessments. Next slide, please. The total amount of the bonds proposed to be issued based on what is in the NID plan is roughly $35 million. $23 million will be used to finance the public fund or the public project, but then the remaining accounts there that you'll see are simply requirements of the capital markets in terms of capitalized interest, debt service reserve fund, the underwriter's discount to sell the bonds, along with any issuance costs associated with the professionals to put together all of the pieces for this type of financing. Next slide, please. So the proposed bonds are being repaid by special assessments, and what this plan does is it has what's called a rate and method of apportionment of special assessments that indicate how each of the special assessments are allocated per lot. Next slide, please. So one of the rationale for creating the Neighborhood Improvement District Plan is that the special assessments are levied on a reasonable basis. And how the special assessments are levied are based on their reasonable benefit received by the public improvements. We've used assessed value to allocate the benefit based on the reasonable understanding that a property with higher assessed value will likely receive a little bit greater benefit than those with smaller, which is how we've created those 5 property classes. It's a reasonable basis also because the special assessments do not exceed the special benefit received from the public improvements. The special assessments are levied in an amount equal to repay debt service on the bonds along with administrative expenses, and they're allocated to parcels within the NID district on a basis that reasonably reflects the benefit received by each parcel, again being assessed value. You go to the next slide, please. This simply says the 5 land use classes on which special assessments will be allocated in terms of the end uses. As I previously mentioned, there are single family, townhome, twins, active adult, and estate homes proposed for this development. As a result, those are land use classes in which different amounts of special assessments will be allocated based on the rate and method included as Appendix A to the NID plan. Next slide, please. Finally, special assessments are imposed in amount of the principal, interest, and administrative expenses on those bonds. Administrative expenses include those costs associated of collection, issuance, and simple monitoring by the authority, meaning the Chester County Industrial Development Authority, should they be the issuer, which is also contemplated, along with the township and the Neighborhood Improvement District Management Association and their administrator. It is proposed that special assessments will be billed and mailed in the same time and in the same manner as real property taxes, and they'll be collected over the 30-year period for which bonds are projected to be outstanding. And 30 years is the standard for this type of security based on the capital markets and the appetite for investors. Next slide, please. So, as Ken had alluded to, there is what's called a Neighborhood Improvement District Management Association that will be created. It will be created as a nonprofit corporation, and this particular entity is responsible for levying and collecting the special assessments annually. So on an annual basis, the administrator, who will be hired on behalf of the NIDMA, will prepare an assessment roll that tells the NIDMA what needs to be billed and collected. It's likely that a third-party collector will be hired by the NIDMA to send those mails at the same time and same manner as real property taxes and be responsible for collecting them and then submitting them to the trustee who will oversee the funds of the bonds. Next slide, please. This further just recapitulates what I just mentioned, so I won't again go into that, but again, the NIDMA bills, collects, and ensures the repayment of debt service on the bonds and that those investors are made whole. Next slide, please. With that, I will open it to questions.
Thanks, Lindsay. To summarize, what I'm going to ask you to do now is if we can check that acreage and maybe make sure that we have the correct compilation of total acreage in the plan. That's a lot to absorb, what we just went through. The plan that's been submitted to the municipality is here in my hand. It was amended. It has a number of exhibits and attachments that we don't intend to present and go through tonight, various agreements that have to be entered into by various parties. But suffice it to say and to summarize, and then we'll open it up for questions from the board. The board can conduct the hearing however it wishes from that point. But to summarize, as I started out by saying earlier, what Lindsay just said is if you buy a home in this development, you will have an assessment placed on your property for 30 years to help finance the cost of these public improvements. It will not affect other taxpayers in West Goshen Township, and there's no liability accruing to the township in the event of a default. The reason I asked the question, why don't we see this more? I've been doing this for 34 years, and I've represented a lot of developers with projects larger than this, and obviously some smaller than this, and I wondered why we hadn't seen this type of financing vehicle in my career, at least around here. And the answer that was explained to me was fairly simple, is you can only use these bond proceeds to finance the public improvements associated with the job. I've not been involved with a job that had $23 million worth of public improvements associated with it. Obviously, as you get smaller, the bond markets aren't interested. It's not worth the cost of going through all this and taking it out to the capital market. So there has to be a critical mass of public improvement to make this worth it. And this project seems to have hit that critical mass by evidence of the fact that there's a substantial public improvement element to it. There are a lot of other improvements, obviously, that you have to do when you build a subdivision over 440 acres. There's a private improvement, site grading and all the stuff that builders do, and landscaping and all of that stuff. That's not included in this and cannot be included in this. So, and the final point, and then I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Bryan, to handle the rest of the hearing, but the final point I wanted to make is the point that I think has grabbed the township's attention for the past 4 months to everybody we presented this to. The primary benefit is the acceleration of improvements, and we sort of skipped over how a typical job would work and when these improvements would come online absent this financing. Under the current land development approvals for this project, many of these improvements, including the township park, do not have to be completed until the 200th dwelling unit is sold. And that would include the connector road. There's all kinds of schedules in these approvals. And under the typical development scheme, God forbid another recession, but under the typical development scheme, that might be 5 years, before you hit that threshold. This accelerates not only the delivery of the park, it also accelerates the completion of the road, the lake restoration, the ability to have, ironically, township residents will be benefiting from these improvements before the people who buy the homes at Greystone will. So when you put it all together, that's the advantage I saw of the plan. Now, with that said, Skip, it's your hearing, and we open it to you however you want to proceed.
Well, just clarify that one point. It would be my understanding that under normal circumstances, in accord with Pennsylvania Municipalities Planning Code, the developer would put up the amount that the township engineer determined to be the improvement cost of a given area, and that it would then be built. If the developer did not finish, then the township has the money to complete those improvements at that point in time, and then is liable for the completion of those improvements under the law.
And under this scenario, we would still be posting that financial security with West Goshen Township. So the township will remain secured. What Mr. Bryan is talking about are two separate legal duties, and I think he's more concerned about West Goshen's liability in this instance. In the traditional development scheme, if improvements are undertaken and the developer has happened in the recession, a lot of projects, I think some in this township, and I know a lot that I was involved with, went belly up. They didn't get completed. Roads were half finished. Stormwater management basins were half completed. No one was buying houses, and banks shut down for 3 years. So a lot of projects went into default. Municipalities in that instance have a pot of cash that they can draw on to complete those improvements. Some did, some didn't, choosing to wait out the recession and hoping that a developer would come along and buy the community and start it up again. That pot of cash, that security will still be deposited with West Goshen Township to secure these improvements. So from that end of it, nothing changes on the municipal front.
So by 2020, all the improvements are in, whether it be the public parks, whether it be the redoing of the lakes and the dams, whether it be the streets, including the Collector Street from Phoenixville Pike to Pottstown Pike, all that is in. And now the IDA has posted the bonds are out there, and a recession hits. And there are no builders that want to come in and build your various pod units, whether it be single family, townhouses, or otherwise. The assessment then, or the cost of carrying the bonds, fall on the Jirakian family, or the bondholders can then foreclose and take the property. Is that correct? But not the improvements that the township has now taken over.
That is correct. The risk there is on the property owner, and at that time, Dean, if all the lots haven't been sold, or Bill, if all the lots haven't been sold, the risk is on you to pay. I mean, that's the risk from the developer property owner perspective. I think
it does not risk the public improvements or the public park area.
That's correct. And Skip, one of the things I learned about this process, the beauty of this, another advantage of this, is we just talked about the recession scenario, which everybody in this room lived to one extent or another. I lived a lot being in the development business. But in that instance, projects did shut down, improvements weren't built, things did stop. Under this financing mechanism, you're really narrowing the window of that risk. These improvements will be installed within the next year and a half. So if there is a recession, you still have the connector road, you're pushing a stroller through the park, you're enjoying the lakes, you have all of the 7 intersections improved that were on that plan, and maybe nobody's living at Greystone, or maybe 10 people are living at Greystone by that time. So it accelerates the public benefit of it, rather than having the public benefit lag as what just happened 10 years ago, through that real estate recession. So I've been told by Lindsay, who's done this all over the country, and by Ken, that this financing mechanism is used quite frequently in other states for that very reason, to minimize the risk that the public improvement languishes. The public gets its take out of the plan, and if the houses get built, they get built, and we think they'll get built. It's a good housing market now. There's been a lot of interest in Greystone. I don't think that's going to happen, but I didn't think the recession was going to happen either. So,
The board have any questions?
I'd like the record to show that some of us traveled to Virginia to look at NID. We saw sections of it complete, beautiful, and we saw obviously areas where there was pure improvements and just open lots because they were not finished yet. It's unique for us because we're not used to seeing it all. But when you have a project that this big, I know we've talked about all this before, that to know that those $20+ million worth of improvements can be done and done in a timely manner, completed, rather than stretch to a possibility of 10 years, depending on what goes on, is a huge advantage. The concern we had right from the beginning was the liability. And, you know, will and how, is there any possible way it could come back on the township? And I think we've gone over that enough for you to, all of you to believe or not believe whether you're secure with that. I am, so that's it for me.
Anyone else have any questions or comments?
I just have a question about the startup cost for the township. So there is some cost to the township. It's forming this task force, well, authority, so it's going to be separate, autonomous. In the beginning of your report, it lists some of these things. Do you have any like basic estimate, ballpark figure of what that might cost the township?
Okay.
One of the slides included the sources and uses, which included the cost of issuance, soft costs, and all the costs of creating that are included in those costs in the ultimately $35 million project. None of those costs would be borne by the township. They would be part of the financing, and they would be paid through the special assessments.
So that's what I was going to ask. Could that be negotiated through like the bond, like covered by the bond?
Well, those soft costs are included in the cost that we will be financing. And just to clarify on a couple of those costs, for example, one of the items was capitalized interest. We'll basically be borrowing the money needed to pay principal and interest on the bonds during the first 3 years that the bonds are outstanding. Because the project had not been developed, the properties haven't been sold, and to minimize the impact on the owners of the property during the startup period. And those are permitted under the tax code. And as Lou and Skip mentioned, these are all going to be public improvements. That means the property will be dedicated to the township and be township properties. If absent that, we would have to use taxable debt, either commercial loans or taxable bonds to finance that. But we intend to issue tax-exempt debt, which will allow us to reduce the borrowing costs for the developer, which will then allow them to help subsidize some of the ongoing maintenance costs of the project as well. But to your question directly, none of those organizational costs will be borne by the township. They'll all be rolled into the bond issue and paid through the special assessments over the 30-year period of time.
Thank you.
And it also does not affect the real estate taxes of the Jirakian tract as it sits today. Is that correct?
That's correct. This has no impact on real estate.
So they would be paying the real estate taxes and then reassessment would take place as buildings grew.
That's correct.
Anyone have any other questions? Go ahead.
Yes. May I come forward?
You may.
Who's this?
I missed the podium. Margie Swart. Has the Planning Commission vetted this proposal?
No, this is not statutorily, we're supposed to come before the Board of Supervisors for this finance. There's no planning involved in this.
I understand that. I'm just curious as to why it wasn't presented to the Planning Commission because of their experience and expertise in development, and they might be better able to advise the board members on their recommendation. Of course,
The Planning Commission did unanimously recommend the plan of development, which has been finally approved by the board, so that plan has been before the Planning Commission. The statute requires this issue to be brought to the Board of Supervisors. It's beyond the purview of it. It's not a municipality's planning code issue. It's beyond the jurisdiction of the Township Planning Commission.
with my limited knowledge of the NID Act or NIDs, what the passage of this or development of this, what extras do the residents, future residents of the property receive by being included in this NID?
The ones within the NID.
What extra do they get? What extras do they get by the formation of this?
The way I see it, nothing.
Uh,
Is that fair?
You get the same benefits of the
Same benefit as
public
any other,
improvements as everybody else.
same as any other resident in West Goshen Township. The right to use the roads and the public improvements, but nothing extraordinary other than that.
Okay. It's my understanding through reading that the creation of this takes place because the residents within that district are receiving something above and beyond the norm of township services. Has the township, or I asked the board before they would approve this, to reach out to the school district? I'm curious about the what effects the acceleration of this project would have on the school district. And what brought that to my attention was reading on the Credibility Farm development process. The school superintendent had mentioned that development would create an additional $600,000 because of the increase in school students. So I'm not sure accelerating this process would be beneficial on the school district, and I would hope that the board would reach out to them.
The conditional use approval was granted almost 11 years ago. The school district has been involved in just about every aspect. I've personally met with them numerous times about busing. So they've been well aware of this project for over 11 years, and they've never expressed any concerns. The Credibility Farm is a completely different issue. That project was just created, what, a year ago? A year. This has been around for 11 years, and the school district is very aware of it.
But we're not discussing the development tonight, we're discussing the creation of this neighborhood improvement district. So that hasn't been discussed with the schools, correct?
If I could take it, if I could just kind of break it down maybe, and maybe that's what we need to do. I think there are two issues we're talking about. We're talking about a land development plan of the various units, and we can put that up on the board there, just for the purposes. Can we get that back up, or is that possible? So there are various units or various types of housing within the district. That is a zoning issue, and that has been approved by conditional use many years ago. Now, what happens under normal circumstances is that developers would, in this instance, because I think of the size of the property, no one is going to have the $23 million to do the public improvements. And I can remember being in meetings with Doc White and the push that the township wanted to maintain all the historic area of that property, as well as the green corridors that you see there, including the ponds and there are some other very sensitive environmental areas there. With that being said, the way I read this and the way it occurs is all the township is doing by approving this, if they approve it, and the IDA provides the funding for them to get the bond money, is to raise the $23 million and put in all the public improvements, but not a house. Developers have to come in and start to build the houses. It could take 10 years for the housing to be built, depending on how quickly people move on to housing. The one benefit to this that I saw as a land use lawyer was somebody would come in and do half of the connector road and stop, because that's all their responsibility was. And somebody else 5 years later would do another half of the connector road and stop. And it might take 10 years to get from Pottstown Pike to Phoenixville Pike with just the connector road, where somebody else would do one part of the parkland but not another part of the parkland, depending on how the pods were sold. In this instance, the Giraffes are taking the liability of doing all the improvements through the bond issue and putting their credit on the line to do that, and then giving it to the township. I mean, not to be selfish, but if nobody ever gets to build there because of a recession, the township residents have a wonderful parkland already given to them, not given to them in piecemeal areas. But in this instance, I don't think it may affect the ability for developers to come in and build, because I think unit density and absorption of population and whatnot would probably be the same in this way as it would be with regard to municipality planning code, except you have all your improvements done.
I think this is clear.
I mean, does the board agree with that analysis?
Yeah, I mean, there's an acceleration, but it's not the homes.
Right.
It's the road, this is my understanding of the public improvements, I'm wrong, but it's the roads and the public improvements.
But our discussions with the school district made it very, very clear that it's an absolute advantage as a safety issue, because no school district will allow their buses to enter on any undedicated road.
Yeah, we're close.
So in this present plan, the way that it's written, is that that collector road is not completed until a certain amount of units are built. So that means that the school district's school buses are going to require all these children to go up to the closest dedicated road, which would be Phoenixville Pike
Or Potsdam.
or Potsdam.
Yeah.
Now, to me, it would be a clear, unsafe situation by not doing this and having this proceed the way normal phased-out communities proceed without buses traveling on undedicated roads. These improvements will be done, and as soon as they're done, the roads will be dedicated to the township.
And one other point, 1/3 of this project is age restricted on the kind of northeast side, so there's no impact to the school. For children. 1/3 of the project is age restricted, so there's no impact for students on the schools.
So who's selling who? I mean, whose idea was this? Is this the township's idea and they're
Marcia, we
saying?
never
this
heard of
is
this
good?
before they brought it to us.
Okay. So what due diligence has the township done in regards to this?
We're doing it now,
We're doing it right now.
Okay, good.
We just started this.
We traveled to Virginia, we looked at it. We did not like this at the beginning, Margie.
Yeah, it's brand new.
It was pretty
Pennsylvania.
scary to all of us. We never saw it.
As a resident, it's very scary to me. It
That's why
appears-
we've come this far.
Right, it appears as though you were trying to sell it to the residents, that it won't increase our taxes, but then you're saying it only affects those within the district.
All those
However,
things are true.
but they will be paying for public improvements that all residents of the township use. And I don't, you know, I know that
The project that we traveled to Virginia, in Stafford, Virginia, 1,800 homes. I saw facilities there that were breathtaking. They had a natatorium, they had turf, artificial turf fields that were open to the public because they were made with public money. So this is the same thing that they're proposing here.
But let's be clear, we're only talking about the construction of the improvements. The serpentine area there that's so sensitive that actually people come and view from environmental standpoints, the ponds, the road systems. But once that's all completed and approved by the township staff, engineers, and consultants, that then becomes the township's maintenance requirement for the plan that was designed and approved many years ago by the township. As I said, I remember being with Doc White and going over all this many, many times. But so that is treated like no other, is every other public improvement. So when you say, well, your taxes go up, there's going to be a cost of maintenance here on new open space in the township that they're going to have to mow grass and plow roads and do all the different things that every other township road and every other open space and open area that's owned by West Goshen Township, just like this property here does. So there may be a cost to the township of maintenance down the road. And no, not maybe, there will be. It's only the cost of putting it in that doesn't a job in the township.
it sounds as if we're creating a city within a city.
Good way to put it.
Yeah.
I don't know, let's say, lose 35 years. I'm 44 years doing this, so I'm an old man. At least I still think I'm young, but sometimes I realize I'm not. But the truth of the matter is, I've never seen this before in the state of Pennsylvania. It's done in other areas, but I've never seen in this area, in southeastern Pennsylvania, or for that matter, any other area in the state that has open space. People would come in and want to develop it with this type of density to create this area that you can do the bonds. I mean, how many 440-acre tracts of ground sit in the 4 counties around southeastern Pennsylvania? In Chester County, this may be the only one at this point, particularly at this location, as close to Westchester and as close to the road systems that are here. So I think the reason that you don't hear of it much is because there just isn't the ability for the ground to be put together in large tracts of ground to do it. And then secondly, if you go out beyond Lancaster and you find a 500-acre tract of ground, nobody wants the density here to make it work. So somebody's going to go out and advance the $23 or $25 million to build it.
There was mention at a previous meeting about a $1 million that the developer would give to the township. Is that the only thing the township gets from this? And does that then become a quid pro quo type situation where, because we still get that if we don't create the neighborhood improvement
The
system, right? We're
township
not
gets
getting-
the road, all these improvements done in 18 months and completed. That's what we get.
do the 598 future residents get? I think we forget about them.
They're going to pay for it.
Well, I think they live there. Not
That's what they
interrupt
get, they
you.
get a bill.
Well, that's not true. I
Well,
mean,
they get an assessment.
supposedly the benefit under the statute is be able to look out your backyard and see the open space or the lake or wherever you are in relationship to the subdivision. No different, in my estimation, than any other PRD is the question of how it's built.
Why isn't the developer going the traditional financing route and just getting construction loans and going to a bank instead of coming to the township and asking us to finance it?
We're not
financing. We're not financing it.
We're not financing.
Mr. Could you, no, I'm sorry, behind you, there's another bald-headed guy I want to talk to. Could you stand up, Mr. Government? And could your counsel stand up, please, Helen?
Come up to the front, please.
Mr. Cumberman is the chairman of the Chester County Industrial Development Authority, and Helen Espenshade is the solicitor for the authority. I noticed they were here listening to this, because obviously they've heard about it. These are the people that will put up the front to determine how the bonds are issued, not the township. The township has no liability in it whatsoever.
And
So he loses his hair if you notice trying to do deals
Well,
like this.
I do a little bit of research and you work with Mr. Bryan's law firm, is that correct?
I am a partner in this.
Okay. I'm just going to end it there and then
I'm
you
sorry,
guys
can I have your name?
Louis Cumberman,
Spell.
Kupperman. I'm here like all of you to learn. This has not been proposed to my board yet, although we did get an early suggestion that this bond issue, if the township approves this NID, the notion would be that the Chester County Industrial Development Authority would be the issuer of those bonds, not this township. That has not come before my board. We do have some pictures in a handout, much like the presentation that was done here tonight, but there'll be a lot of questions that my board will have. I've been the chairman of that board for probably 6 or 7 years and been on it longer than that. And this is something new for us. So we will undertake it at the right time and in the right steps of the process. Any questions of me? If you're done with me, can I go now?
I guess folks want to know, it sounds too good to be true, and, this day and age, people are pessimistic, and that's healthy, I think. I think just maybe if someone could explain why you guys are doing it this way rather than the traditional way, what benefits Like, you know, is it, obviously, you're not doing it to be altruistic, you're doing it for a reason. So what, is it the statute that enables you to get financing easier? Something needs to be
Yeah,
explained.
as I tried to say earlier, and Ken, you can certainly embellish on this, but the gravamen of the situation here is you're looking at a project with over $23 million in public improvements.
Right.
That is the impetus for this. That level of public improvement hasn't been attached, nor any increment of that level of public improvement hasn't been attached to any job I've been associated with in a long time. There's a lot the township wanted as part of this development plan, as obvious by that. We didn't dream of the Collector Road. That was on the township's master plan probably before I was born. The township has always wanted, well, probably not that far ago, but the township always wanted a Collector Road between Pottstown Pike and Phoenixville Pike. Nobody around to pay for it. So this, when this plan was approved, as Mr. Bryan said, 5, 10, however many years ago it was, 4 or 5 years ago, whenever, that was job one. Job two was, township also thought, this is a beautiful site with many historic structures on it. Nice place for a township park. 165-acre parks don't drop out of the sky every day. That's expensive. That costs a lot of money. PennDOT, you know, everybody comes to the table. These aren't things we dreamed of. This isn't something that the developer put on the table. PennDOT then steps up to the plate and says, hey, you know, while you're giving, we have about 6 intersections in this township that we have no money to improve and that we have no plan to improve, but need to be improved badly. Would you please do that too? Okay, put that on the list. Well, by the time you get done saying yes to everybody, you've got $23 million in public improvement. So to answer your question, that's a long-winded way of saying absolutely, it's a different way to finance rather than traditional financing.
Also, due to the nature of the project, that they're public improvements, we can, under the statute, cost of the assessments, we can also finance these on a tax-exempt basis. As opposed to commercial finance, we can sell bonds at lower interest rates because they're federally tax-exempt as well as exempt from state income taxes. That provides some benefit to the developer for sure, which is why we have discussed creating an endowment to help subsidize the cost of maintaining these facilities. I also would like to point out that although this is new on the residential side, the neighborhood improvement districts are used routinely in Pennsylvania for commercial development. And for the very reason that Lou mentioned, because you have places like PennDOT who don't have funds to construct roads and overpasses. I worked on one recently in Lehigh County for a big box distribution center. And we financed public improvements, roads, and overpass over Interstate 78. PennDOT had no money for it. We were able to do it at the outset of the project. It was not solely the NID. We also had a tax increment financing in place, and the NID actually provides the backstop. Again, the property owners pay for it in the event that the tax revenues are not sufficient. Here, we're not even asking for the tax revenues. It's solely the property owners who will be using it. It was also done in Northampton County to fund public roads and an overpass over State Road 33. It's been done in western Pennsylvania, in Gettysburg, and many other places in Pennsylvania, but not for purely residential projects. Any other questions?
Doug had it. Doug White.
Hi, I'm Dr. Douglas White, 1001 Whitby Lane. I'd just like to say what Dad would think about all this, and he would probably say, I can get a park and these improvements within the cost of the taxpayer. Sounds good to me. Now, he was probably thinking the existing taxpayers. And if the new residents in this development are going to be paying homeowners association fees and an extra assessment, I don't see anything really wrong with that. To my understanding, I guess this goes away in 30 years?
Yes.
So, I think it's all right. Which is good. I think my dad would think it's all right. So, and I guess, Dean, another question I have for you is, where the manor house is, that's going to be exempt from this. So there's going to be no development around the manor house. Right. Okay. That's it.
I think I think it's true, though, that people should be, we're also looking at this. There's no decisions being made yet at this point in time. And lastly, but correct me if I'm wrong, until you guys come up with the full amount of money, the 23.3, nothing happens. You have to come up with the entire amount of money that you have funded for your improvements. Is that correct?
That is correct. We've had conversations with representatives of the IDA. I'm meeting with the IDA tomorrow. We'll be submitting an application and pursuing the normal process with the IDA to see whether they'll approve it. It would also require approval from the State Department of Community and Economic Development. Only after all those approvals are in place will we go out to the bond market and then sell bonds, which are projected to be about $35 million.
So again, from township liability, you're going to sell the bonds and then come up with the money to develop based on that. But until you sell the bonds and know that the money is in your pocket, we're not doing anything here.
Correct. That's correct. And just to add on to Ken's point, these bonds would not be sold to the market until there will likely be an underwriter that is hired to sell these bonds. The market will require a market study so that the bond buyers have surety that they have an understanding that the supply and demand exists for this particular development. There will be an engineer's report that the bond buyers will want to see that say that all of the public permitting and approvals have been taken in place so that it would not impede development for purposes of those revenues securing the debt. And finally, there would be an appraisal done. And those are all items that are required by the capital markets, and the money would not be raised until those items are also checked for purposes of fulfilling their requirements.
Thank you. Ted Murphy, Chair of the Sewer Authority. I had an opportunity to sit in a meeting, and I'd just like to ask for a clarification. Essentially the same question that I asked during the meeting we had there. The question has been raised this evening about whether, what benefit is there in this and the cost. Who's bearing the cost? My understanding is that the future owners would bear the cost of this. The current owners would bear the cost presently, but as property is sold, that cost would go on to the buyers.
That's correct. The land you see up there is the assessed land. Right now, the owners of the property will bear that cost until obviously the lots are sold. And as each lot's sold, then the assessment will pass on to the property.
So this process going through the NID, there is, it raises money for the process. The future owners of the persons who buy the properties will bear that cost. In a conventional process, who bears the cost of those developments? Wouldn't it be the same homeowners? It's just done at a different time, correct?
Cost of the gas somewhere is probably the price of the house, some way or another. It's 6 one, half a dozen of another. Nothing to look about, but it would probably be the homeowner under any circumstance.
All right, so the benefit is that the improvements get done a lot faster, and the potential owners are able to go in and pick whatever property they want throughout the process because they can get into it, and it's all over.
Yes, and I can share, and I don't think it's details out of school because we talked about this with the township. They're under conventional development, as Mr. Bryan said, we do have a phasing plan.
It chops this property up and probably develops it out over 10 years. With the first pod on Phoenixville Pike and the second pod out on Pottstown Pike, and then, some of the adult units will get sold, and then some of the single-family units will get sold. So there's a plan B. It's not like, nobody's ever thought of what happens if. This is just a better plan, no matter how you look at it.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name's Tony Spadaccini. I've been in West Oh, I'm sorry. Come up here, fine. Yeah, it's SPAD.
I'm sorry, no. Don't worry, I can see you. Great. And your name again?
Tony Spadaccini, SPAD, ACCINI. I live in Pembroke. It doesn't really affect me too much, but just the bike. It doesn't really affect me too much except for traffic, but just some quick numbers. I read about this occurring and I just decided to come. It's $23 million, but the bond's going to be $35 million. And if you divide that by 600 homes, it's like $58,000 on average per home. That's a lot to ask for people to say, you can walk down the street, you've got a little pond for you, you know? I hope the developers thought about that. We just bought a home, it's $500,000, you know, I'm sure these homes are going to be $1 million plus, but 58 grand just to walk around my pond. And the other thing too, as you can see why everybody is upset, is it's, you know, going to the census 2010, West Goshen is 12 square miles, 640 acres per mile. I'm an engineer, so don't worry about this, but it's basically 440 acres divided by 7,680 acres. That's 5%, close to 5.7, close to 6%. So that's a sizable chunk of land being used and upgrading. So I can see why everybody's upset.
I saw our bond council at a previous meeting in regards to creating the neighborhood improvement district. Who engaged bond council?
Margie, I engage bond counsel to oversee and represent our interests. I'm allowed to do that by...
Was that expenditure in the budget?
Margie, this project just came about 4 months ago. I don't know how in 2016 we would have put this in the budget. How would we have known this is coming in 4 months ago? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. It comes under legal services.
I'm trying to understand it, Bill, because if we're not issuing bonds, why did the township engage a bond counsel, and why are we paying bond counsel to be here tonight?
For due diligence, Margie, in this legal process. Simply put, I mean, we need to do our due diligence before the supervisor. I'm not sure how you argue with due diligence. We have to do our due diligence. We're doing
Did
that
the
right
board know that you engaged the bond counsel?
now. He's been here at every meeting, yes, as far as I know.
I do know Mr. Reed was contracted with the sewer authority, and I'm always told that that's a separate legal entity. So this legal entity approved you engaging his firm for his advice.
Yes.
Thank you.
I just asked for clarification. I thought it was the case, but it is the case that we are going to be reimbursing the township for bond counsel costs anyway. That was one of the expenditures that's being financed through the bond issuance. So there's no outlay financially from the township.
Yeah, prior to moving to Westchester, I lived up in Bucks County and a large toll road development. And they invested a lot of money in roads and parks and everything else. There were probably 500 homes up there. I don't know what their value is now, but they were pretty substantial homes. And there was no, the toll brothers kind of maybe reached in their own pocket to put the roads and the parks and everything else. Is that a question of you guys not having enough critical financial mass to swing this deal yourself? Is that why you're kind of paying?
Phil, a part of it. It's the tremendous expenditure, the public improvements. I mean, I haven't seen a job. I don't know what toll job you're talking about, but I do a lot of work with Toll Brothers. I haven't seen any toll job that approaches $23 million in public improvements. I mean, if this was $1, $2, $3, $4 million, which is what you typically see, maybe 5 or 6, nobody'd be here talking about it. We would just, my guess is, Bill, you would just build this out like a traditional subdivision, and you know, the improvements get installed over time, and you know, you do pockets or parts of it incrementally. What we're trying to do is just to accelerate that improvement cycle. That's all. And to use a different way of financing. Bond markets are a perfectly legitimate way to raise money in the United States. I think we all know that. or you could go to a bank and do it, but the bond markets are receptive once you hit this critical mass.
In the case of the Tolbo's development, it was pretty, one of the reasons we moved there, because they put in baseball fields, there was a football field, there was parks. They made an extensive investment, they put in drainage fields all over the place. So they forked out millions of dollars. I presume they reached in their own pocket to pay. And my question is, don't these guys have a pocket deep enough to do it themselves? Why are they looking for the assistance of the township? Well, we're actually secure some of this stuff, are we?
No, the township is providing no security for these bonds. There's no mortgage on any of the property. It's the property owners will be paying debt service on the bonds. The township won't be issuing the debt. And the public markets allow us to go out and issue 30-year debt at a fixed rate of interest, as opposed to banks which routinely will limit their loans to a much shorter term at floating rates. So it provides some certainty as well in terms of financing the project.
Any other questions? Marcy, what up?
I just wanted to point out that we're talking in total value or expense of public improvements. However, with the different neighborhoods, I imagine some would be sold as, I'm pulling out names, Toll Brothers or Full Tank. So they would be responsible for the cost of the public improvements within those neighborhoods. So.
You mean the finish?
The finish.
You mean the public, the internal roads?
Right. Correct.
If the road's not dedicated, yes, they would be responsible for that.
So, I mean, obviously, home builders are going to rush in and want to build here because they typically would be responsible for those expenses, but they're not going to be responsible for them, right?
They are. The normal expenditures for the home will be borne by the builders themselves. We're talking about public improvements, the major roads, but the cul-de-sacs, the internal roads, subdivision roads are not part of the public improvements.
Great, that's good to know. Thank you.
Margie, do you have a list of, in your position, do you have a list of the improvements that we're talking about here for the $21 million? Do you know what they are?
Well, there's a list on the slide, correct? And then, again, so those were to like Green Hill Road and intersections, so why would the residents in the mid be paying for those public improvements?
Those will be included within that public property so that we can improve those intersections. If they're not included in the neighborhood improvement district, we can't finance that.
This is a 45-day wait and a thought by the township. In the meantime, I think maybe, and you're in her position, maybe we should get her a breakdown as to the improvements that are part of the 21 million, as well as the rest of it, which is not part. So you understand what is being built by the 21 million and what isn't being built.
But that included the improvements to the intersections, the traffic lights and such?
Yes.
So then the residents will be paying, right, the assessments will be paying for the public improvements on the intersections, which aren't in the NID.
As well as the collector road. Oh, yes, it is part of it. Here, I mean, Mr. Crowder can correct me, but the way I see this is every time you do a major subdivision, whether it's this one or others in other townships, PennDOT comes in, starts telling you what you have to do to PennDOT roads and PennDOT lights because of traffic. So it becomes a traffic situation where PennDOT reviews the plan and says, okay, traffic signal has to go here, or these signals over here have to be redone with different timing, different widening of roads, whatever the case may be. And that's what's happening here, correct?
That's exactly right. When you look at all those road improvements on there, but for the collector road, all of the improvements, if you go through the development plans, were required with or without the Greystone development.
Back up with the board.
So to answer your question, you're correct. It seems weird that I know where you're coming from, that the residents of this subdivision would be paying for something down at Green Hill, but the statute allows those public improvements to be included in the calculation of the assessment. Somebody had to do those improvements. PennDOT is good at telling you what needs to be done. As the township knows, they're not real good at telling you, providing the funding, for doing it. So you can include that in the district, but all of the improvements, but for that collector road, which is something that West Goshen wanted, they're all needed whether Greystone is built tomorrow. If you sit at those intersections, and I'm sure everybody in this room has, whereas the chief can probably tell you there's problems with those intersections now. So they get fixed within the next year and a half.
And see, that would be a requirement of PennDOT wherever they put it, because they felt they would affect traffic in this area, and these are the improvements PennDOT wants. And so if you're going to run a collector road through what I call that collector road from Phoenixville Pike, the Pottstown Pike, PennDOT's going to say, you're not going to connect to our road, our PennDOT roads, unless you do these improvements. That's what it comes down to.
The way I see it, Skip, Brian, Margie's concern is for the protection of the new residents that aren't there yet. What are they going to benefit from? And what they are going to benefit, how they are going to benefit, is from the traffic being able to get in and out of their development. If you don't put those adjustments on Fern Hill or whatever in proximity to that development, if you don't put those improvements in, you're not going to be able to get in and out of your home. So that it's directly benefiting those future residents. It's just that simple.
And they're going to have to provide everybody, when they come in here to start looking at homes, with a full disclosure of what's going on. So it isn't as if it's going to be, okay, we don't know, this is going to be a special assessment. In a way, it's no different than a homeowners association for open space or for road systems that are undedicated road systems. It's kind of that way. A little different because it is public improvements, but they would have to agree with their eyes open to come in and agree to that. That'll be step 2, won't it? If this goes through, like I said earlier, the way I see it, maybe people on the board agree with me or whatever, but if the township gets all the public improvements and the Jarakian family now is obligated to pay back the money, and no developer comes in to buy a lot or buy a system to buy a lot, I guess they made a bad deal.
Every time you say that stresses me out.
I live in East Bradford. I think I may go there and start talking about one of these the next time too.
I'm just concerned, one last comment, I guess. I'm just concerned that the developers are using a law that wasn't intended. The law was written to encourage cities, mainly it was written for cities, is my understanding, with blighted areas, with residents or a community that had blight. And
I'm sorry,
neighbors,
had
blight. And the residents within that already lived there wanted to improve their neighborhood. And so creating this when you allow just one property owner, there's something about a 40% rule that 40% of the residents within the NID don't agree with the creation of it, you can't do it. So,
Because there's one property owner.
right, so.
But this statute does not require a finding of blight. That is true with others, for tax increment financing and redevelopment authority projects. This does not require that, and it's used for many business improvement districts, commercial improvement districts. It just hasn't been used for solely residential, but it's used regularly throughout the Commonwealth with the consent of the property owners, as we have here. And as Skip pointed out, this will be in all the marketing materials for the homes in this development. Nobody's going to go into this without recognizing and knowing full well that they will be responsible for the assessments. And they're going to look at the combination of the assessments, the tax bill, and the price of the housing and deciding whether or not to buy a house there. And, you know, it's a free country, and the property owners will move in there willingly. And if they don't, if they can't sell it, then the existing property owners will be stuck with the bill. They are expecting that not to be the case. I don't think that they're going into this expecting to be stuck with the property. They fully expect, and they've done market studies and demand studies to show that the market is there and the cost of the project will be marketable. And we're also confident that bonds secured by these assessments will similarly be marketable and that it will work.
That concludes our presentation.
Hi, my name is Robin Stuntebeck, S-T-U-N-T-E-B-E-C-K. This is really a question just for the board. We're just talking about the budget. When the roads are dedicated and the park will be dedicated, is that all happening in 2018?
No.
After it's completed.
2019, okay. So I'm assuming that there's nothing in the budget for 2018 that requires the township to pick up, incur additional costs now to maintain those properties and the roads as they're being created.
Absolutely. And
Okay.
the developer or the owner can offer all this stuff for dedication. Township doesn't have to take it.
Okay, great. Is it possible to have that slide and some of the others made available to us or our website? Because I do have a question about Pottstown Pike and Phoenixville Pike. In talking to residents in the last few months, I've learned that those roads are very dangerous for many of the residents who have either driveways or small developments that enter onto them. And I guess I have a question. Most
Those are state roads as well. Pottstown Pike and Phoenixville Pike.
Yes,
They're state roads.
those roads,
Yes.
they're state roads, exactly.
Sure.
So with PennDOT being involved in those improvements, I wondered if the township has an obligation, or if you guys have an obligation to reach out to the residents who live on those roads to make sure that they know what's happening. I'm concerned because many of the development issues that I think we've heard about recently relate to highly trafficked roads that are going through neighborhoods where the residents are having an impact because of that. And I'm hoping that the concerns of those residents are taken into account when those decisions are being made. And since it's your project, my guess is that the township will not have a seat at that table, and I want you to be aware of that.
This project has been approved by the township through zoning and planning, so all those issues have previously been addressed. We're only talking about creating a district to finance the improvements that have previously been approved and required by the township and PennDOT.
Okay. But you also said that was approved in 2011. 7 years ago, is that correct?
The additional use approval was 11 years ago. And the final plan approval was, what, 2 years ago?
Last year.
Yeah, actually, it was just last year, absolutely.
Okay, so does that mean that in that approval process, the existing residents were notified of the changes and that the existing residents were given an opportunity to speak about their needs in terms of what they've seen as needed improvements on those roads? Because, for example, on Pottstown Pike, we have multiple developments that exit, they have to leave their development to get out. And just this past weekend, I was on one of those roads, and it took me about 10 minutes maybe, on a Saturday night at around 7:30, 8 o'clock at night to get out and feel like I could do it safely, making a left-hand turn out of Cross Point Road. So it's those types of residents that have been talking about the challenges that they have on that road in particular. So it may be out of the scope, but I think it's something that the board needs to consider. If we've got PennDOT's attention, we probably need to start paying attention to the extra part of that road that may not benefit from these improvements.
Stan, I'm sorry.
Because this is a really important decision. When it comes before the board in January, I'd like to request that it's also a public hearing and that it's transcribed. That it's just not an agenda item.
It will be an agenda item at the January meeting. And again, we're not seeking approval for this plan of development. That's already been approved. We're seeking approval to create this NIC district to help finance the improvements that have already been approved.
But the approval won't happen until January. You're asking it to be an agenda item with
Well, it will be on a regularly scheduled meeting of the Township Board of Supervisors.
And I'm asking the township solicitor if it would be appropriate to have that as a public hearing so it is transcribed.
Well, it would not be a public hearing per se, but it could be a transcribed meeting. Would that be okay with you?
Be fine?
I think that's perfectly okay for the court reporter to come in, and if you want to transcribe what is said during that period of the meeting, that would be fine.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that there's some confusion about, I'm hearing about the planning commission's role in this and some of the questions that I'm hearing from the audience. I had the same questions when I was first coming in, but just to be clear, this thing's been going on with this property for a long, long time. And I understand when I looked at it, I think it was like 86 pages of special conditions that we had.
There were 88 conditions.
88. It's a lot. So, part of what brings us here today is that plan was finally approved. So when you hear these folks saying that, well, that's already been through, like before I served and before some of us here on the board were serving, previous folks and township supervisors, Doc White, worked very hard on getting some of these concessions that normally developers don't have to give, especially to traffic improvements. If you look to some of the traffic improvements that we got here, I have to be honest with you, there's some really good traffic improvement concessions that we've got. Now the notice to the residents and everything, I can understand that. We could always try to improve on that and let people know. Everybody doesn't have time to come in here and to find this out, especially when it's a long process. But most of this stuff has gone through it. And what we're looking at here is just a possible way of financing it. That's it. The plan's already done. The planning commission's already taken so many bites out of this apple. I mean, up until what we had the issue about the dam and everything recently. So, it's been a long process, but we'll do the best we can to make sure that people are notified so people don't think that we're rushing through something. This is just a presentation. We are not approving this right now. Just want folks to know that. And we appreciate your questions and your concerns going forward. Thank you.
And Chris is right. I mean, it had to be 2005, 2006. This particular traffic ground was talked about being developed, and the zoning was much more dense. And what Doc White did is he did three things. The first thing he did was he was very sensitive to the open space areas. So he took it upon himself to really walk the grounds and make decisions on how you save the ponds. There's a lot of discussion, and I was involved in some of it, as to what do you do with the ponds? Do you let them just go the way they're going and not be refurbished? Do you make them public property? What is the liability of public property if you have a waterway in the system? How do you feed the ponds to make sure that they stay alive? How do you handle stormwater so the stormwater doesn't pollute the ponds? Can you ice skate on the ponds? Can't you ice skate on the ponds? I'm dead serious. There were a lot of conversations about many things that I was involved in at that point in time. And the greenway system was really a Doc White idea to put it all together and create an area for all the residents of West Goshen Township, because he knew this was really the last big tract of ground in West Goshen that could be done in a way that, in the long run, for would have a green area, and then, of course, some housing, and then everybody would like the real connector road, because obviously to get from Phoenix to Pike to Pottstown Pike through Green Hill Road right now isn't the easiest thing in the world. So a lot of that was being conversed over many, many years before it even got to a point that it became a plan, so to speak.
Just to be clear, the plan doesn't concern me at all. The creation of the NID is what concerns me.
Okay.
I know that's what the public hearing is about. And that's what I have questions
about, and I'd like to see the township do a lot more due diligence before a vote comes to board.
Margie, I spent 11 years on the Chester County Industrial Development Authority, of which 9 years I was chairman. This project is really on the up and up. It really is on it. I've been through bond issues and that sort of thing before, and it's a very, very good project as far as I'm concerned. What I see, for example, is the Gerardians having a good thing to offer to builders to come in, so they can control the builders better, I feel, and get better properties for us. What is the township going to get? It's going to get increased assessments. So that it's a good project, considering it's already done. It's really a good project for the township. We don't like to see the township lose all that open space. That's really, years ago it was decided by the zoning. So I've had my say about the financing. That's really a good setup for us.
What do you need from us now?
Nothing.
The way we would proceed from here is, as I said, we're sort of at the beck and call of the statute here. The hearing tonight was obviously informational, but legally was for the participation of the Gerardians. The hearing is supposed to be so the affected property owners can come, hear the presentation, and if they have an objection, they have 45 days to raise it. After the 45 days, as Ken said, we would ask the township to establish the district. And if you have a court reporter here, that's fine, it doesn't matter to us.
So to make it clear, the movement tonight is the clock starts,
That's correct, on the 45-day objection
so
period.
that everybody understands. That's all, that's what we're doing.
But it's still up to the board to approve or not approve the district.
Right.
After the 45 days runs,
They've done it
it's still a decision of the township. It's not automatic.
Thank you.
So thanks for your time. I do want to make one clarification before we close the record. There was a question on the amount of acreage that it actually is in the NID. The slide was erroneous. The actual amount of acreage is in the revised plan, which I handed up as, I guess we'll mark it as applicant's Exhibit A, dated November 7, 2017, and that acreage is 440 acres, not the number that was shown on the slide. So with that clarification, thank you. We would close this record and be back in January. Thank you very much, and thank members of the audience too.
Thank you. You want to
The hearing is closed at this point in time.
Adoption of the preliminary 2017 general fund, waste and recycling fund, sewer operating fund, capital reserve fund, and highway aid fund budgets. Casey?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. October 11th and October 18th, we held budget workshops. Unless the board has any other questions, the general fund preliminary / request budget has been posted on the website for review by the board and the public. What I'm going to go over is our revenues, expenditures, and fund balance for each of the funds. The next regularly scheduled meeting is, I believe, December 13th, so the budget will lay open until that time. I strongly suggest if there are any questions from the public or the board, email them, drop them off. We'll get them answered for you. So what I'm going to do right now is just go over general fund, sewer fund, waste recycling fund, capital reserve fund, and state highway fund, revenues, expenditures, and fund balance. And again, any questions, feel free to raise them or send them to me in writing, and we'll get those answered for you immediately. General fund for 2018, we're looking at revenues $15,998,583, with expenditures of $15,894. I'm sorry, wrong day. $15,894,337. with a surplus of $104,246, with an ending fund balance projected at the end of 2018 of $10,500,322.
Excuse me, Mr. Lamont, do you have a slide that you could,
Ms. Schwartz, we did 2 full budget workshops. The second one, I wish we had maybe 2 or 3 people here. We've gone through the budgets in depth.
No, continue.
Okay. Sewer fund budget. We have revenues of $4,701,285, with expenditures of $4,918,067, with a deficit of $216,782. That deficit is funded through fund balance of $4,552,852. Waste recycling fund, we have revenues of $2,235,580, with expenditures of $2,296,514, with a deficit of $60,934. Funded through the fund balance remains of $2,243,514. Our state highway liquid fuels fund, we have revenues of $750,800 with expenditures of $750,000. And again, those expenditures are strictly for annual road paving. With a surplus of $7,800 with that ending fund balance of $7,800. Capital Reserve Fund, we have revenues of $5,497,112 with expenditures next year of $2,013,590. And we'll have a fund balance then of $3,483,522. The total fund balance projected at the end of 2018 will be across all 5 township funds. We'll have a fund balance of $20,788,010 for future use, reserved for future use at the board's discretion for future budgets across those funds. Again, the final budget will be at our next regularly scheduled meeting of December 13th. There's a statutory requirement of a 20-day lay-open period for the budget. We far exceed that since our meeting is so early this month. We'll have, again, it's the preliminary/request budget is posted online, and we'll have copies downstairs for anyone who wants to review it in person. And again, submit any questions you may have in writing, and we'll get those responses back to the board and the public as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Question.
When did the board receive the line-by-line budget?
In their packet, we delivered those on Monday, late afternoon.
2 days ago, Monday? So has the board asked any questions or deliberated over what was presented to you on Monday?
We just started the discussion about 5 minutes ago, so. And we did two full budget workshops on the 11th and the 18th.
So this is the budget that's going to be advertised in the newspaper.
Correct.
So at no time, the citizens were not allowed an opportunity to participate or ask questions regarding the line-by-line budget.
Is that a question or that is?
This was just produced and printed Monday late afternoon, so no one had a chance to even look at it until Monday late afternoon. And we had 2 budget workshops where all the raw data inside this was discussed in detail.
I've watched the videos of those budget workshop meetings. There weren't any line-by-line. It was just what...
Those were the key financial highlights. Again, this was just printed Monday afternoon.
Here's what I'm asking. East Goshen Township, I just printed this off of their website today. Their 2018 proposed budget meeting is next Tuesday. They allow their citizens to access the line-by-line proposed budget a week, at least a week before the board approves the preliminary budget. They, I won't go through them all, but the proposed all funds summary, the 5-year capital improvement plan. Where can I find our 5-year capital improvement plan?
I'll provide that at your leisure.
Okay. That's part of the approval process for the budget next year, correct?
Let's see, not formally, we have discussed it in detail in our 2 budget workshops.
I know the township code says that you have to have a 5-year capital improvement plan that is approved every year. When will that information be provided?
We can provide that at your leisure. I think the board's had it.
Yeah, we discussed it at.
I believe we provided that to the board at the first budget.
Yeah, we worked off of that. We
Yeah.
work off of that every year.
Absolutely.
That's the basis for all the capital expenses.
But part of approving the budget is also approving the 5-year capital improvement plan, correct? So that should be presented tonight and allow the residents the 20 days to comment.
We discussed that in detail on the 11th and the 18th.
Margie, I was there.
And Doug was there, Ms. Stuntebeck was on at the 11th.
And it was, I asked questions, I submitted.
You submitted a bunch of questions to me afterwards,
And
absolutely.
it was, Margie, they were bending over backwards. I mean, I've never seen this before, even with that. And, okay, I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
The budget is a line item budget.
Here it is. Correct, right here. Would you like my copy? It's online, it's been posted, so that's up to you.
We're just doing this backwards. This should have been made available to the public before the board approves
We
the
introduced
line by
the
line.
preliminary budget.
Yeah.
We're only approving the preliminary
Right.
budget so that it sits
For
for
20
everybody
days, absolutely.
can look at it for us to vote on it
Absolutely.
for the final. We've been through this.
I'd like to ask some questions. I did see when I checked one last time at 6 o'clock tonight, I noticed it was online, so I did.
I put it up at 3 o'clock, right?
Okay, at 3 o'clock.
Sure.
Great. So, actually, let's just do it this way. I would like to request that the board meet next Wednesday to go over this line by line.
We've done it.
You didn't go over the line by line budget.
We're not meeting next Wednesday.
Margie, have you reviewed the minutes of the 11th and the 18th? I think that the.
I watched the video.
Okay, because the minutes that they approved tonight, I believe, are 10 pages long, and 99% of it is budget information. And that the key financial highlights were, and actually, Mr. Pielli found a typo that we corrected for the 18th, thank you, on one of the numbers.
How do you ask questions on a line by line budget when it hasn't been presented?
I think we presented more detailed information than this even provides. Would you not agree?
It wasn't the same thing that was printed out on the 6th, but it was something that was included on something in the 6th. I haven't had an opportunity to go through line by line. I take responsibility for that, and I have some questions about it, but I understand your point, but to that typo that we were talking about, I believe that was not line by line. It was
No,
another
no.
thing, but it was included in line by line area.
Right.
I think that's what you mean, is that what you mean?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, all right.
Well, and budget meetings I've been to before in other municipalities, you see the line by line first and you go through that, and then the follow-up meetings are more of the overview. It seems to me we're doing it backwards when you were presenting just overview.
Or they're doing it backwards. I think we provided extensive detail.
If that process needs to be adjusted, so be it. The fact of the matter is, we've always gone through all the capital equipment and the expense requests in public to discuss them so that we could put them in a budget after those discussions so that we adequately budget. Now it sits, and under law, it sits for the length of time more than required. And if you have questions, then you can ask them when we do final budget, or submit them, like we're saying.
If you amend the budget at the December meeting, does it then not have to sit for another 2 days?
Absolutely not.
No.
No, ma'am. No.
Upon looking at the numbers that were presented at the previous 2 meetings and the information you provided online, I asked about a variance of an ending balance projected this year and the beginning balance of next year. It's actually a $1.4 million difference.
Those are projections.
Okay. The explanation is a projected 2017 surplus of $1 million.
Correct.
Upon the 25 minutes I had to look through this budget, I can't find where it's showing the surplus of $1 million. Can you answer that question for me?
It's in general fund, it's just over $1 million due to increased, let's see, the two biggies. Now mind you, they could be in 40 different categories, you understand that? It's not just, we didn't get a check from one person for $1 million, you understand?
Yes, I
Okay, the biggest one, we received $564,000 from Chester County Hospital that we did not expect until 2018.
And where does that show in the budget?
Building permits.
Building permits.
So bear with me for a second, just a second.
I'm showing 375,000.
No. Second page,
Mhm.
1361, 03730. We had budgeted 525 for 2017. We're projecting 900,000.
Right.
Okay?
Okay. So that's what, 3.75 of the 1.4 million. Where's the other 1.4 million?
I don't have the detail in front of me to give you that.
Submit it when we'll get it.
Well, Ms. Denham was kind enough to reply to my question about it, and it does say building permits, as well as
Earned income is
Earned
up to
income.
2.7%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but over $7 million. 2.7%.
right, but the budget of earned income tax for 2017 was 7.6, and you're showing a projected 7.9.
Right.
So there's another.
Sure.
Okay.
That's $300,000 right there.
All right.
Of your 1 million.
Right.
So that's about 900 every 1 million. So these are projections. We don't get final numbers for 2017 until late January next year. And then we go into the audit.
I'm curious why the township does a projected in these documents instead of a year-to-date. So when the board or the residents are looking at these budgets, that you actually see what the year-to-date is.
Well, this is a budget document. We show projected numbers. So the projected numbers is where the department heads, the finance staff, believe we will end up at the end of the year. It's just a budget.
When I look at all other townships and municipalities, it actually shows the year-to-date figure, because that seems to
Well,
allow for
year-to-date
a
would
lot
only
of.
show through October 31st. I don't know how that helps with the budget for next year.
Right.
Because we don't have
Because you're
revenue.
saying the year-to-date number wouldn't be a hard figure.
Well, it'll be a hard figure, but it'll only go through October 31st. It's only November 8th today. So it's a projection then, because,
You work on it.
yeah, we don't know what we're gonna get in the next year.
Guys still gotta work.
Right.
I'm sorry?
You guys still gotta work, we gotta keep.
Yeah, and we could have a blizzard tomorrow and spend $300,000 to snow clearance, which we don't wanna spend. So.
Well, I understand that, again, but when I compare it to all other municipalities, they're doing a hard number year-to-date figure.
But that doesn't help with our next year budget.
Well, that would help the board in improving.
The board gets a report every month on the year-to-date.
I mean, your suggestion, Margie, is that you'd like to see it, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, where in the future we do it like micro line item, going to macro, the final budget, rather than putting out the macro version and ending up with the line by line now. Is that what you're saying?
I'm just saying it's different than other budgets that I look at from other municipalities. It shows
We
the
try not to
actual.
compare ourselves to other municipalities. I think we do things better here.
What do you think is the benefit to that? I mean, I'm curious. I mean, what would you?
Well, you know exactly what it is. I mean, projected.
It's only November 8th. Okay, for example, in previous years, let's use our very good friends at QVC. We've had corporate.
All right, actually, I just would, I have some
I'm sorry, Marge,
questions.
I'd like to give you an example. And I'll start again. Our very good friends at QVC have very high-level, highly paid employees. They sometimes cash in stock options. We'll get a check for $700,000 on December 20th.
Out of the blue.
I don't know, I wouldn't be working here if I could say, oh yeah, we're gonna get $700,000 in 40 days. I'd be working on Wall Street. So these projections are good, hard numbers for what our department heads, our finance staff think we're gonna get by the end of the year. And these projections will change again for the final budget possibly. but they're good estimates.
And history has shown that
They're very
they've
accurate.
always been conservative
Yep, absolutely.
and always come out looking good. That's why we have what we have.
I believe so.
Do the township employees, non-uniformed, pay into their pension fund?
I've answered this before, they do not. There's never been a contribution.
Do the police officers pay into their pension fund?
Yes, part of their pension they do, yes.
Why do the uniformed officers pay into their own pension, but the non-uniformed?
Contractual agreement for the past 30, 40 years. Yeah, at least.
Is that
The board has
some-
never imposed that on non-uniforms and our benefits.
Did the
We've had,
board
we did
discuss
have
that
we
in
had an
creating
extensive
Did the
email
board-
back and forth
Did the
about
board
that.
create or discuss that in the creation of next year's budget?
I don't recall.
I mean, have we reviewed changing the pension?
Yeah, well, where the employees would contribute 2 or 3% or 1.5%.
The pension committee, you know, they review that constantly and recommend to the board, you know, every few years as to whether we should do anything with regards to that. There's never been any movement to change from the design pensions that we have.
I'll answer. I'm the liaison to the pension committee, and I sit on their meetings on a regular basis. And yes, that question has come up, and the situation has been explored. It has not been decided what to do. We are coming up with right now some recommendations on the pension committee. I'm not on the committee, I'm just a representative to it. But we are going to receive, as the supervisors, some recommendations from the pension committee. So to answer your question, yes, it is under consideration at this point.
I had email correspondence with Mr. Lalonde regarding the $1,000 check written out of petty cash for him to distribute cash to the employees. Where can I find that in next year's budget? You had said it was
Sure.
in the line item.
I believe that is,
That's a longevity pay you're talking
no,
about?
it's the perfect attendance, $50 for being perfect.
I think for the record, we addressed that with Kristen said that, you know, we were going to come up with a written policy for that, even though it's not a lot of cash.
Miscellaneous employee benefits.
Okay, and what falls under miscellaneous employee benefits?
Coffee, water, $50 for perfect attendance,
How many days a week do the employees work?
4 or 5. Everybody works 40 hours a week.
I noticed Public Works is here from 7 to 4?
6 to 4.
6 to 4, okay.
4 days a week.
Hour for lunch. So I noticed overtime pay, when is that paid out?
After 40 hours per federal law. I don't understand that. If you work 40 hours in 1 week, you have to be paid overtime, anything more than that. Except that's for salary people.
Salary?
I'm sorry?
Salary people have to?
No.
Oh.
Rich, do you want to go through the list of exempt people? We'll do that.
Well, no, I
Mark,
just,
Dave, me, Mike Moffett, poor Doreen, Derek, Bill. We're here, we could be here 75, the chief, we could be here 400 hours a week. We're gonna get over that. The non-exempts, get over that.
I'm going to have, I wish that the township would allow this line-by-line budget to be presented. I'm not going to stand up here and stumble through this. I'm disappointed, year 3 going into this.
Ms.
that I
Short,
feel like,
at your request again this year, we scheduled 2 budget workshops. One was a special meeting, which with the couple of hourly people, Mike and John, with the advertising, we probably spent $700-800 to have that meeting. Doug was here, Ted was here, he was here, and he was here. That was it.
as Ms. Kim likes to say, the devil is in the details. You can't ask and inquire and get answers to your questions when you don't have the detail.
We have the detail. I'd like you to review the minutes.
Well, we'll get to that.
Prepared to do that.
I mean, we still have time.
We had all the department heads here. We had a table set up to be grilled by anyone in the audience, and
I am going to ask that the board not vote to approve this budget because.
they're not approving the budget. They're just setting it up for final approval.
It has to sit by law
Absolutely.
for
But
over a
this is a
period of
draft
time.
budget. You are
It's a
approving.
preliminary.
You are
Yep,
approving a
absolutely.
preliminary draft budget that you all received independently on Monday afternoon, 2 days ago.
That we've been creating for,
But
since
as a
June.
board, you
Yes.
have not deliberated on the line by line and the devils in this budget. Is that correct?
The two budget workshops I presented had fine detail beyond this,
I can find her answer.
beyond what you see with the line by line.
I'll send you questions.
Please do, that's why we're here, absolutely. Okay.
Any other questions? We'll move on.
Well, no, I need a motion to, yeah, to advertise, and then move to
I will
December.
so move.
You?
Is the motion to advertise or the motion is to approve?
No, advertise.
To advertise the
Correct.
preliminary budget.
Correct.
But-
Just to make it clear, we're not approving the budget.
You're not approving the budget, you still have
Has
35
to
days
sit.
plus.
Has to
Absolutely.
sit.
Absolutely.
December 13th.
Yep, absolutely.
I believe to approve a preliminary budget, and what you're approving tonight is this budget.
We did
document.
not, my motion was not that. My motion was to advertise this as the preliminary budget. It was not to approve it.
No, advertise with the intent to adopt on December 13th.
Okay.
Exactly what you,
And I think probably part of the confusion was it says adoption of, so maybe some people
Okay.
out in the audience might be confused. Maybe it should have just said advertising.
Good point. Good point.
Okay.
And we'll change that
I see
next
that, and I feel like, oh, we're adopting a budget. I can understand the confusion on it, so maybe next time we should.
What they've done, Marjorie, is they have a motion on the floor to advertise the budget for possible adoption on December 13th. But they're not adopting anything this evening.
by law, the board has until December 31st to adopt a budget.
I'll look at the law. I thought you have to approve a draft budget that then goes on to be advertised.
It will be the preliminary budget on the
It's
13th.
advertised with the intent to adopt.
No, it won't be the preliminary budget on the 13th. That'll be the final
That'll be
budget.
the final
Final
budget.
budget.
After the board has taken 35 days to look, submitted questions to me, they'll deliberate about it on the 13th. And if they so move to adopt it, they will do that. If we need to hold a special meeting on the 31st, we'll do that as well.
I might have better luck after the first of the year, which brings me to a question of, I know with a new board, the budget will be reopened to give the new board an opportunity to participate in the formulation of the budget. So how does that process happen? Or how do,
By statute, the newly situated board will have, you have to act on the reorg night because you have to have that, if you reopen the budget, you have to have it adopted again by February 15th. So it's a very concise.
otherwise you shut the township down.
Yeah, or else everybody goes home except the cops. We can't operate because there's no approved
but
budget.
that's plenty of time, correct? I think it
Depending
has to
on-
be a 15-day advertisement period, if I remember correctly.
If they want to
So-
reopen the budget,
You have to
So
reopen it.
at
you
the
can make no
organizational
changes.
meeting,
what would you?
could I ask of the new board to make sure that's on the first agenda for the first meeting in January? I mean, how does it take place? How can we
You
ensure
can
that this
stand up and
budget-
ask them.
Absolutely.
Okay, and it doesn't get voted on, it's just simply the law allows it to be reopened?
No. There has to be a vote to reopen the budget.
You better believe it.
It doesn't just naturally come back open.
Yeah, it's a major step.
Absolutely. And you have to have it completed by February 15th.
Okay. I'll be asking for that to happen this.
Thank you.
You did before.
Yeah, you've asked twice
Not the
before,
first
so it's
time.
not the first time. Okay.
Thank you. Won't be the last either, Mr. Rico.
I'm sure that.
Is there a second? Advertisement sent to
I'll
us?
second it.
Okay.
All in favor?
I don't have a problem with keeping it advertised with an intent to adopt, because I had some issues with the general fund, and I was going over a little bit of this before, so I just want to put that on the record. So advertising with the intent to adopt waste recycling, sewer operating capital reserve fund, and highway fund.
Correct.
I have no problem with that. Should I have just a couple questions? I'll get back to you guys. I don't want to bring them up right here.
But see, that's just it. It should be brought up in a public forum.
I still have some homework to do, Marge. I admitted to you, I was busy these last couple of days. I got this, so I'm gonna do my homework, and I'm gonna come back.
See, Mr. Lalonde would like any board member with questions to go to him with emails or phone calls and ask him about the budget. He wants residents to send him an email, so, and I believe this process should be taking place in a public meeting, and it doesn't happen in this township. And I would like to object, just to be on the record, and say, I think this is a violation of the Sunshine Law, and I'll put it out.
Go ahead, I'm done. Finish, please.
No, I would just like to be on the record as I believe your vote to approve this preliminary budget is a violation of the Sunshine Law in case I elect to do something within 30 days.
That's what we went to court on several years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. How'd that work?
Well, yeah, but Mr. Lalonde did not tell the truth, so that's why he won.
Come on, Margie, come on. I was
We
under
ever
oath
done
in a court of
anything
law,
right
come
that you
on,
like?
give me a break.
Well, that was a court, that's the thing.
Right.
That's,
Okay, now let's go. Any other questions?
so,
Mr. Meeker?
Was there a vote?
There wasn't a vote.
We didn't have a vote on that.
I thought that Chris had.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it, okay, good.
Chris was clarifying his,
Yeah, I just have, I'm not voting to approve or vouch for the attempt for the general fund.
The general fund, you're taking that out.
The other ones.
Okay, I got it.
He's not approving the general fund, but the others he's approving.
Gotcha, okay.
Next is discussion and possible approval of the 2018 fuel bid.
Okay, every year we do, about this time, we do fuel bids. They were opened on November 2nd, 2017 at 10:15 a.m. We have 4 categories: unleaded gasoline, BioClear Ultra Low Sulfur Diesel. Both of those are fueled at our fuel line. We have a low sulfur heating oil bid and a dyed ultra low sulfur diesel fuel for our various emergency generators. We received 4 different companies bid in various of the categories. The low, and we're seeking the low bid, of course. The low bid for, we'll go in order of the companies, for the low sulfur heating oil was Scheller Oil Company at $1.98.9. Riley & Sons were the low bid on the unleaded gasoline at 1.8027 cents, and the BioClear Ultra Low Sulfur Diesel for our fuel oil at 1.9948. Mauger & Company was the low bidder on our dyed ultra low sulfur diesel for the generators at 2.170. And we received a 4th bid from Superior, and they were higher than the rest. So seeking approval for Scheller for the low sulfur heating oil, Riley & Sons for the unleaded gasoline and BioClear ultra low sulfur diesel, and Mauger & Company for the dyed ultra low sulfur diesel fuel for our generators.
I will make that motion.
second,
Any questions? All in favor? Aye. Discussion and possible approval of various sewer department materials and dumpster services bids.
We have Mike Moff, our sewer superintendent, on hand for any questions. Every year we go out for 2 materials bids and then sludge hauling, which we press all of our sludge down there to be hauled away. The first chemical is called dry polymer. We had 2 bids, one from Neo Solutions and one from George S. Coyne Chemical Company. The low bid was for 10,000 pounds, more or less, of the dry polymer. Neo Solutions was a low bidder at $1.688 per pound. So we're seeking approval on the dry polymer for Neo Solutions, Inc.
I move for approval.
Second.
Any questions? All in favor? Aye.
The next chemical is liquid polyaluminum chloride. And I have a note from Mike that the second low bidder, which is Univar USA in Middletown, PA, they were the second low bidder. However, the material has to be field tested, and the low bidder did not successfully
The low bidder, the characteristics of the chemical meet specifications in the documents.
Right, that's right, I'm sorry.
The second low bidder we currently use, so they do not have to do a plant trial.
Right, because everything meets our spec currently. So the low bidder in this case would be Univar USA for 36,000 gallons, more or less, of liquid polyaluminum chloride at $273.80 a liquid ton. So I seek approval for Univar USA.
I'll make a motion that Univar.
Question, what happened on the first one?
It did not, the actual, it did not meet our specifications.
Oh,
That's why they're included.
Second.
Any questions? All in favor?
Aye. Okay. And last thing is sludge hauling. We received two bids for two 25-yard dumpsters, one from Charles Blazinski Disposal and one from Solid Waste Services, AKA Mascara, which used to be Oak Township Hauler. Blazinski was the low bidder at $237 per load. Mascara was much higher at $330 a load. So I'm seeking approval from Charles Blazinski at $237 a load for two 25-yard dumpsters for our sludge hauling.
I'll make a motion.
Is that a liquid? The sludge is pressed and relatively dry.
It is dry?
Yeah, it's sludge.
So it doesn't drip out as the truck's driving down?
No. It's all dry.
Second.
And we wouldn't let that happen anyway. We wouldn't let that
We have a
happen.
first and a second, any questions? Hearing none, all in favor? Next, discussion and possible approval of 2016 senior citizen trash rebate program.
Every year, the board is very gracious and offers a senior citizen rebate for our trash recycling service. 80% is the rebate on the annual fee. So the board approves the list, and they have to go through a very detailed process with the state of Pennsylvania to get the exemption that we then use to, it's based on income. So it's low-income seniors who then get the 80% rebate in their trash and recycling bill. So you have the list in front of you, we never read the names, but we're seeking approval tonight for the list.
I move for approval. I believe it's 121 residents.
There you go.
To receive the senior citizens rebate for 2017 of $272.
What's the senior citizen? What age?
Yeah, I think it's 65 and older.
Same as the state.
Yeah, it's the state criteria. We don't set the CAP age. So it's easy to do it all the time.
You have to qualify for the property tax rent rebate.
Right.
Through the state. If you qualify for that, you're automatically qualified for our rebate.
For this program.
So you have to qualify for that to qualify for this.
Yes, exactly.
Because that puts you in the income bracket, the age bracket.
Yep.
Can I ask a quick question about, do they actually apply through the state?
Yes.
Yeah, they have to apply for that first.
Okay.
They have to get their check,
Yeah.
get a copy of the check, or we can look it up online. Once we approve that they received it, then the check comes out at the end of December, right?
Yeah, the board will cut
That
checks
once
on the
we-
13th of December, absolutely. Yep.
What's the age threshold for that?
65.
One more year.
I'm not sure you're going to qualify.
Now, Phil,
But can I just ask one more question?
Sure.
You have to be 65 and have the renters.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not just for anyone over 65. I mean, you have to be a relatively low income,
Yeah, it has to be
very
low
low income senior to
Trash from the.
trash from the township. Yeah, they pay us and then we pay you back. Absolutely, the rebate, absolutely. Yeah, it can't be for private trash service.
Right.
Get a first and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Next is set the date of December 13, 2017 for conditional use hearing for internet-only sales for 325 West Town Road.
Phil, do you have any details you want to add to the board?
Yes, when we established the MPD district there back on West Town Road, Felix had interest in doing this. Now that we've established that, they've come forward. However, I've asked them to provide me, I need to do a parking study to make sure that the building that they're doing it in meets the zoning requirements, because I can't give them a conditional use for something that doesn't meet zoning. So I still have not received the parking information that I've asked for. So the applicant has provided me with a letter waiving the time requirements for the MPC.
So this may be pushed until January? if
Correct.
it happens?
We may push it to January. I've spoken with the attorney again today, and he keeps telling me he's going to give me the information, but I haven't seen it yet.
So are you still comfortable with us setting the date?
Yes. And Colleen is fine to come on the 13th.
Okay, then I would move for approval of December 13th.
I'll second that. Any questions? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Execution of Chester County Vision Partnership Contract for the Township's Comprehensive Plan Update Project.
Yeah, we had our first comp plan task force meeting in October 24th. Our next one is November 28th, Tuesday night at 7 o'clock. Feel free to join us. We went through the county, Janine Spears was here from the county. She went through in complete detail the county process for us to go through to satisfy the grant requirements. The county, I think, less than a week ago actually provided the contract, which was in your packet, detailing all of our requirements and what we have to do to then get reimbursed for $25,000 through the Vision Partnership Grant. So we're the first signatories on the tri-party agreement with us, the county, and Ray Ott, the awarded consultant. So it's just signing the contract tonight. So
I would make the motion that we approve.
Chris? Yes.
Chris?
Any questions? Yes, Doug?
Our cost 45,000 or 37,500?
It's 45. That was the typo that Chris found, actually. That was exactly the typo in the first budget discussion.
Thank you. We got a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it. Any other items come before the board?
I do have a question, please.
Sure.
Mr. Carter, I don't think you gave an announcement, you provided an announcement tonight. Okay, I'm just wondering, when do you expect to have feedback from the state for the stormwater management plan? Is there a time frame in which they need to respond?
So that's the problem, it's open-ended. We could not get comment for 6 months. They have hundreds of permits
Right.
for review.
Okay.
Our permit is due, or should be issued in March.
So that's just the hard stop that needs to be issued, or when they would agree to it before then?
They anticipate issuing a new permit in March 2018. Whether they can get all the plans reviewed by then, I deal with more than I do. And I don't know whether they'll issue the permits without having the plans reviewed or not. And we also don't know whether they'll issue the permits after they issue comment letters, or whether the comment letters will have to be addressed before they issue permits. We don't know the answer to any of that yet. DEP hasn't told us.
Right.
I think so. A little bit of time to go through this budget. I know the second class township code requires the township manager's salary to be paid out of the general fund. Where can I find that line item?
It's listed in general fund. Let's see. $1,400, 1010, manager.
Is that just your salary, or is the assistant manager's?
It's a mix of both parts.
What percentage is that?
I don't have that there off the top of my head. I can provide that to you.
The law requires 100% of your salary to be paid out of the general fund. I believe in years past, you said that this is maybe only 40% of your salary.
I have to look at it.
Is Ms. Denham here to answer that question?
She can't, I'm not having her answer.
Okay, so 138,896 is a combination of the manager and assistant manager. Okay, and then we go to the sewer fund, but you're not sure of the percentages?
I don't know.
So if I'm recalling 40%, is that what you're about?
I'm not going to answer that. I'd have to look at it now.
Okay. So then sewer fund,
administration, that's not Mr. Moffa, correct? Administration would be,
No, absolutely, some of it is. We can
well,
provide you with a breakdown. Right here.
no, well, there's treatment plant manager, isn't that?
Correct.
Okay, so the administration, that would be you.
We can provide a complete breakdown of all
But
salaries.
this line item would be you and the assistant manager again?
We can provide a complete breakdown for it. I don't have it from right here, sorry.
Supervisors, can you answer my question? Like, do you know what?
We'll give you a complete, thorough breakdown of it.
Absolutely.
You asked it last year too.
Yep.
Because you were in argument with Ms. Camp about the splitting of the departments, which we've always done.
Would the board please provide in the approved budget for 2018, what is required by the second class township code, the entire salary of the township manager as a separate line item, not in combination of other administrative staff. So it is clear to the residents what his salary is.
Well, it's clear to the residents because they approved my salary by resolution.
And a separate
Resolution.
Well, and that's what I think it was.
You asked it last year, and I don't remember what Ms. Camp
I
said.
believe it was in the, whatever it was, what's showing on the citizen transparency website is
It's
like
accurate.
$50,000
You don't
or
have, yeah,
$60,000 more than what was approved by resolution.
because Mr. Davis's salary is in there. And we don't, on our citizen transparency website, we don't break it down to that detail. If you can ask for it, we'll provide it for you, but we don't go into that detail on the website.
Okay. And then this, under the waste and recycling budget, there's also a line item for manager salary, so you get a portion out of that fund as
We'll
well.
provide you with full.
Yes, they're all split out.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Make a motion, we adjourn.
Seconded.
All in favor?
I just wanted to mention Len as a veteran too. I forgot you, Lenny. I'm sorry about that. Thank you for your service.